Hello, um, this is Elliot Vella's video logs, episode 3. The title is Drug Addiction dash Give It to Jesus. Yeah, this is something that I struggled with a lot in my life. Ever since I was about 16, started smoking weed. When I was about, I think I had my first beer when I was about 11, and then by the time I was 13, I was drinking beers. And then through my life, once I started smoking weed, I had my first joint when I was 16 at the end of year 10. Wagged school for the day and saw my mates on the town bus. I caught the bus late to school, so I caught the town bus. Saw them, they were all going to one of the houses, and ended up deciding to jump with them, and we smoked weed at home at his house, and we all hid in the closet when his dad got home, and that was my first time getting high, and got the munchies afterwards, and all got pies and chocolate milks and strawberry milks, and I was still stoned when I got home, and then I didn't have another joint until I got my license, which was probably about, I think it was a few months later, probably about 6 months later. Had my first car that I bought off my brother, and me and my mate drove to Nimbin, which was like a hippie town. You can just get drugs real easy, and we planned it. I had my license, had my car, and we went down and we started. We went there for the first time, got a bunch of weed, bring it back and rolled it into joints, and rolled like 10 joints. We're all excited about it, and we smoked weed, and we had this, we used to play a lot of music together, and so we would email each other like songs, and we would sort of record things and put them together, and he would play a lot of guitar, and he was making guitar effect pedals and always making music, and I would make my own songs, and sometimes he would just send me a recording and I'd put some words and lyrics to it and send it back, and sometimes I make my own songs and send them to him, and he would sort of edit and put more sound, like tracks over it, and drums and guitar and stuff, and we were starting to sort of Google, exploring that whole world. We grew up pretty tamed in a way. Both grew up Jehovah's Witnesses, and so me and him, we had drinks through our brothers. I was the youngest. I had 2 older brothers and an older sister, and he had 2 older brothers as well and a younger sister, and so we would sort of have drinks with our brothers, growing up, and nothing crazy, like a beer or two, and but still pretty young to have that, and I guess we had sort of rebellion in us as well, growing up in the religion cult thing, and it's quite controlled, and yeah, you weren't really allowed to hang out with your school friends, and there's this whole world, that you just never really got to explore or know about. And so when we had that little bit of freedom, it was the first bit of freedom, having my license and car, was sort of like everything changed after that. And we started being able to do things on our own a bit, and before that, our parents would Um, he lived in like Lennox Head, which is, and I lived grew up in the country, little country town, Kyogle, and then we moved to Cabarita Beach, the coast, which is, you know, a couple hours away and on the coast. And when I moved there, we were only about, we were still, I think it was about an hour and a half or something away from each other, maybe not that long. Or maybe I think it was, but our mums would drop us in between. We would sort of meet in the middle, and that was cool, and that was really good of them to do that. And he became, you know, my best friend. We were sort of both each other's best mates, you know, and so we started exploring things together, you know, because we didn't really get to do it when we were younger. All our other friends, you know, had, you know, smoked a lot of weed younger, and had sex and stuff, and were going to parties and doing things like that. And we sort of were quite tamed, and so we had all this energy, you know, and all this like curiosity, you know. And so in the beginning, it's all really fun, you know, and you're sort of curious, and there's this whole world, you know. And even though we, you know, we had a lot of love for God, you know, and Jesus, and in a way when we were younger, because we grew up in these religions, and, you know, we'd go witnessing, you know, door knocking, and that was always a bit scary, you know. When you're real young, it's sort of fun. You're going out, you know, walking around the streets with a bunch of other Jehovah's Witnesses, and when you're a teenager, it sort of becomes scary and difficult, in a way. Our brothers sort of made it cooler in a way, and the people, you know, but then around us, you know, their friends and stuff, like, we were lucky to have that. And there is a community there, you know, but they were all still big drinkers, you know, all the Jehovah's Witness crew, especially the ones we were hanging out with. So there was still an outlet in a way, and we, you know, we skated and surfed and played a lot of music and drew, and so you still have these outlets, but the whole world of drugs and everything, besides alcohol, you sort of kept away from, and it's a good thing in a way. But in another way, it's not a good thing, because I feel like the journey, you know, the journey to explore all that sometimes is, you know, well, for me, and maybe, I don't know who else feels like this, but you want to experience it, you want to see, you know, what it's like, and everything, to then know that it's not the answer, you know. And so it took me a while, you know, it took me a long time to sort of figure out that it's not the answer. And so, yeah, we would sort of smoke weed a lot together, when we were about 16, me and him, and we would skateboard a lot. We'd go surfing when we were at his house, and skating when we were at my house, and mix it up. Then we'd do a bit of both at each other's houses, and play music together, and then, you know, and then we would have these little bits of weed, and we started sort of doing these trips to Nimbin. At the start, you know, we'd smoke weed probably when we were 16, you know, we'd have some, and probably have some every couple of weeks, you know. And then you'd have some when I'd start smoking, you know, at night time when my parents were asleep, and creating music and staying up late and drawing, and then it sort of just, I don't know, it becomes more of a regular thing. I remember the first time, you know, I got stoned with him. We went to a park in Evans Head, and on the beach, we went on the beach, and we had some weed, and I sort of introduced him to weed. He was interested and excited about it as well, and he freaked out a bit. He saw all these bats, and he didn't have a good experience. But then he had some weed again, after that, and he then he found a liking to it and liked it, and I wasn't pushing it. He sort of just did that on his own, but I still opened him up to it. But then he became quite a big weed smoker as well, and we sort of got become sort of known, for smoking weed, and I think it's all sort of fun at the start, you're sort of just exploring and watching videos and reading books and listening to music and and smoking weed at the same time, and sort of like opening up your mind to all these things, and in a way, you're exploring a spiritual side in a way, because you're exploring your mind, and you're looking for things, and you're on a search. And growing up a Jehovah's Witness, like there's spirituality as well, but it's quite Jehovah's Witness is sort of like I don't know, spiritually blocked as well in a way. Like it's sort of like you're sort of you feel a bit like a robot in a way, like you weren't allowed to, grow facial hair. You had to you had to be a certain way, and have a certain image. And if you had longer hair, there would be people at the meetings like telling you to cut your hair. And we used to draw and stuff in the meetings, and then we paid attention as well, and we would answer up and do things like that. And but our parents didn't like us drawing, and my dad didn't like me drawing, and we'd sit. Then we started hanging out, having our own car and license, and we would drive and go to meetings ourselves, and sit and we'd draw and stuff as well. And there'd be people looking at us and telling us not to and stuff. And so you sort of, when you're sort of pushed into like, a box in a way, you just want to push back, push against it. Which I always sort of used to think that if I wasn't so controlled in a way, maybe I wouldn't have gone so hard, with everything, with all the drugs, because I would have been able to explore it with balance and then see that, it's not really the answer. But when you're not allowed to do it, you want to do it more, and well, we did anyway, and I did. And so it sort of becomes the only way to have fun. It's unconsciously you sort of start doing it, and then it's really fun, and then you sort of like, you just want weed and you want alcohol there whenever you want to do something fun, and in the early days we weren't always, we'd go skating and we wouldn't have weed, and we'd probably steal a little bit of alcohol from our parents or something, put it in a bottle, just make a concoction or something, and just like four different little bits of spirits and some Coke or something like that, Coca-Cola, and go skating for the day, and go skating in a school or something, and just go, or like a little street area where there's some stairs or something, and skate around. And but yeah, there is this unconscious switch, that you start relying on it to have fun in a way. And I just remember, we used to do a little bit of hitchhiking around our areas and stuff, and I just remember sort of driving around Suffolk Park, and I wasn't responsible with my license. We were driving up, like my car and stuff, I was driving it before I had a license, and we'd go up to, up to the Gold Coast Mall. Like I sort of lived close to the border of that, and smoke cigars and stuff like that, and I didn't have a license. We'd go meet my sister or something, and we were just driving around all the time without licenses. He did the same thing with his uncle's car, and he got caught. But there's all this just rebellion, you know, and but it's sort of fun, you know, sneaking into bars and stuff like that. You know, I was doing that a lot when I was like 17, 16, 17. I was doing that when I was like, I was getting into bars when I was 13, you know, all my older brothers, and sort of getting in with them, and just so young, you know, and we'd go see these bands, Bourbon Street and Lennox Head Pub, and this old like Led Zeppelin cover band sort of thing. They played like the Doors, and it was fun, you know. We were dancing, and we were still around the Jehovah's Witness community. All my like couple cousins and mates, and they're all sort of in their 20s, and so there's sort of something, I think, okay in the way of being around that community still, you know, because you weren't just left to sort of just get blind, you know, and like you could have fun, but you were sort of still around, you know, that community. And but when we started exploring to it by ourselves, you know, our brothers and stuff had moved away a bit to the city and stuff. My brothers came to Melbourne, and his brother, I think they moved to Sydney and stuff, and we were around some of their friends a bit. And but yeah, we started smoking weed, and then we sort of would just go to Nimbin, you know, every few weeks, and we got some acid, and that was a big step. That was a wild thing that we did, because my parents and his parents, they were going away for the weekend to like a Jehovah's Witness convention, and we were starting to sort of get to a point when we were 16, 17, where we were sort of like pulling back from going to the meetings and church sort of thing as much, and starting to play a lot of music and go down a different road. And he wasn't going to the meetings as much. I wasn't. Our parents were sort of quite like, they really wanted us to, and we'd still go for a bit to keep our mums happy and stuff, and both had sort of weird relationships with our dads, and we still loved them, you know. And but yeah, there was all this sort of rebellion coming, and yeah, we just, that weekend we went and got acid, and we were like, it was a Friday night, and our parents were going away on the Saturday morning, and well, my parents were, and we were at my house that weekend, and we got too excited, and we were like, we're going to do it tomorrow, you know, when they go, and we did it that night. And you know, we went to the Headland in Gabarita, and you know, smoked weed and did some acid, laid out on the grass and looked at the stars and everything, and you know, looking at the table, and the table was like dripping, you know, it was just old paint, but it was just started to drip out a bit, and looking at the stars, and all the stars were like blending together, and we thought it was wild, and we just got excited and smoked more weed and went back to my house. And I lived in the garage at that point, and we smoked some more weed, and mixing those together, acid and weed, and especially when you're that young, like we looked into each other's eyes, and we sort of lost who we were. You know, I looked at his face, and his face was blending to different faces, and we sort of looked like we were just like trying to trip out more, and we sort of got lost a bit, you know, and we forgot who each other was, and I sort of, you know, sort of like got up and sort of stripped down to my boxes sort of thing, and it was just like hot, you know, and like, okay, where am I? What is this? And I was in this little cloud, and sort of got lost a bit, and walked up to like look for something to stabilize me in the kitchen, like walked in the kitchen, and then I was just like, this is crazy, I don't know who I am, and walked into my parents' room, you know, and that was, I feel bad about that, you know, I felt bad about that, and worked them up. My dad had like his own history with drugs and stuff, big history with him. My mum didn't, and she grew up in Jehovah's Witness. My dad didn't, and yeah, sort of worked them up, and they looked after us, and I sort of was not having a good trip, and he was still in the bedroom listening to music, and my dad sort of knew about acid and stuff, and so sort of just, you know, talked to him, had a blanket over me, and like she was checking on him, and we woke up in the morning, on the couch and stuff, and we ended up having to, he was like sent back to his dad's house and stuff, and I dropped him back, and he wanted to keep, like, he was like, that was the best, I want to keep exploring this, and I was like, I don't want to do this ever again, like, this is crazy, and then, yeah, there's just a few things that, at the start that sort of, I had a few things happen, like we used to play a lot of music, and we were drinking a lot of alcohol, and hiring out these like halls, and hiring out these like music studios and playing music together, and with another couple mates, and my old brother-in-law and stuff, and we'd drink and we'd play music, and then we'd drive back to his house, and I got pulled over by the cops once. I sort of tried to drive them, and they sort of chased me down, and got pulled over, and I had alcohol, had an open drink in my hand, and it's like gin and coke, in my hand, and blew over. I'd be drinking, like, I didn't even blow that much over, but like, compared to what I was drinking, I had like 10 beers and a bunch of like gin and cokes or something like that, and it was only 16 or something, and so that just started a whirlwind of things. I ended up getting a lawyer, and trying to sort of, I was at the time doing like this window cleaning run, in Alstonville, in this like sort of little country town. It was for my dad, and I needed my car for that, to keep earning that. I was going to TAFE at the time, learning graphic design, and then I ended up, going to uni and stuff eventually as well, but I sort of just needed my license, and it was going to screw me over, and we had this plan of moving to Melbourne, and but that sort of put a block in that a bit, and got a lawyer, and he sort of postponed we went to court, and it's like, what if I do this like 6-week driving course, maybe that will look better, and get off, like, not losing my license. And so I did that, and then while I was doing that, I was still working, and did this like big day of work one day, like I was working at like 4 o'clock, and I worked all day, caught up with my girlfriend, we had a picnic, and then I was driving to this, this traffic driving course, along this big highway over the Gold Coast, and I fell asleep driving, put my hand, like this while I was driving, and fell asleep, and woke up, and I was like hitting the side of the road, and on the massive highway, I did a swerve and stuff, and pulled over, like I was sort of in the middle of the road highway, and a bunch of cars pulled up, behind me, and we sort of, like, you okay? And I'm like, my bonnet was on the, on like up, so I couldn't see anything, and I was like, man, I just like, that's wild, like, and so a bunch of guys like helped me push the car over and to the side, and then the cars could keep going and stuff, and I was fine, and but and then, like, so we called the cops or something, or someone called them, and so they came and totaled my car, and had to pay a fine for that, and so then I didn't have a car as well, and I was going to lose my license, and we didn't know yet, and so I finished the traffic course, had to have my mum or someone drop me there, mum and dad, and I just, I just had done that thing with the acid, going into their, their room, freaking them out a bit, and they, they were grew up well, they didn't grow up that way, but they were Christian, Jehovah's Witnesses as well, and so it's freaked them out a bit, and just, within this like 1 year, did all these sort of like wild things, and I ended up going to court after I did the traffic course, and still lost my license, So I couldn't work, couldn't drive, didn't have a car, bought another car with my mum. My dad paid for it, and it was like $800, and we didn't have anyone to look at the mechanics or anything. We just bought it off without a roadworthy, and it was screwed. Like it was, it was going to cost like $3 or $4 grand to fix, and like damn. And then, and I had this girlfriend, and we're sleeping around together and stuff, and it was all things that you weren't supposed to do as a Jehovah's Witness, and we'd planned to move to Melbourne, me and my mate. My brothers had already come down here, and so then I was sort of just like a bit of a menace. I'd been like a sort of really tamed and like a sort of good kid my whole life growing up, until this sort of like until 16, and then just all these things that happened. And I'd finished my TAFE course. I did like a 2-year TAFE course. I was still pretty chill, towards all of that, but I was starting to sort of like step away from going to the meetings in church and whatever, and starting or exploring all these, this weed and stuff like that. And then we did the acid, and so I got to a point where, it was like, okay, well, what are you going to do? Like, you can't really keep doing this work. And so, I needed new options, and my girlfriend, she grew up in Byron, and she was back, and we sort of met when she'd broken up with her boyfriend, and we'd met a little bit before that at a party and stuff, and but then, she came back after she'd broken up, and we sort of started dating and stuff, and sleeping together and smoking weed together as well. And she was living at her sister's house, and her sister's husband was like a good friend as well, and so he was playing music with us, and so it was sort of like, so over that period of time as well, we were sort of hanging out and having drinks, and me and the older couple weren't smoking weed, but we were drinking a lot together. And then me and my mate, my girlfriend, would smoke a lot of weed together, and after people went to bed, and so much like driving stoned, and driving drinking, and driving, I'd drive to his house, and we sort of met, or we wouldn't have all these friends that we went to school with. We had them, but we weren't really allowed to hang out with them, and so we ended up hanging out with my girlfriend's, younger sister was our age, and and so we hung out with all these Byron people, and we became friends with them, and that was sort of our crew, and we, we're sort of hanging out and, smoking weed and playing music, and they were all moving to Melbourne as well. And so after, we'd sort of been hanging out for about a year or something, me and my girlfriend, and me and my mate, for a bunch of years, and we're like, okay, don't have a license now. She's moving back to Melbourne. Me and my mate were planning to move back to Melbourne in about, another 6 months to a year or whatever. And she was going back, and so I was like, well, why don't I just, my dad said, well, why don't you just go down to Melbourne now early, and your brothers, have some work for you as well. And so I did that. I moved down with my girlfriend, and to them they were like, it was meant to get my own place and stuff, but I moved in with my girlfriend, and no, they didn't like that. It was fun for me, in a way, but it was sort of the gateway to just like stepping away from the whole church and meetings and everything like that, and starting to explore everything else and drugs and everything. And I moved down to Melbourne, and my brothers then didn't want to give me any work because I was with my girlfriend, even though it was just one of them, because he was still going to the meetings and stuff. My other brother wasn't. So they sort of didn't give me the work. So then I was down in Melbourne and didn't have any work. and I had this graphic design, course, but I just needed to make some money, and tried to get a job with a TAFE course down in Melbourne, and it's like creative city, like you're not going to get a job with a graphic design TAFE course from up there, and so I just needed some work, and my brother-in-law, who he ended up moving down as well, and he gave me some work, and I was super lucky for that, and that was, I think, God as well, and we were good mates as well, and that just opened up, a whole world of things as well. We would still keep like playing music. My other mate ended up moving down, but me and my girlfriend were living together, and we sort of, over a couple of years, we're living together, and then me and my mate lived together, but then we were at each other's, me and, he started dating that girl as well, her younger sister. And so we would just, me and him had a house, an apartment, and the two girls had an apartment, but I was always at, at her house hanging out, and he was always at the apartment with his girlfriend, and so after about 6 months to a year, we're like let's just, move in with our girlfriends again, and so we did that, and just opened up that world, that unconscious switch of just like always having weed, always having drinks, and you sort of become sort of dependent on it in a way, and you don't have, there's no part of like God in your life in a way, and it becomes your dependency, and sort of known for the smoking weed, and known for, the fun person of like coming to parties, and me and him, like even out of the Byron people, like we were the big stoners, and you become dependent on it, becomes your identity, and yeah, you sort of don't choose for that to happen, but it sort of just does happen. And there was bits, I always had weed, and like there's a period then we were sort of like, after a year or two living in Melbourne, and it was like always had weed, and there was bits where I tried to slow it down, and I'd just get it again, and I had this sort of, I did like unconsciously had this like depression, in the back of my head, and weed made it better, and drinks made it better, and you'd have a beer or two after work every day, and then it's like I'm drinking every day, and smoking, smoking after work every day as well, and it would be like the only thing to sort of, make your life better, and becomes your identity, and then the only times when I was like try to chill out weed is like just don't have it in the house, and don't have weed, don't have drinks in the house. And so we did that for a bit, and that's sort of when I slowed down weed a little bit, and we'd just have it at parties at, in people's houses, but we wouldn't have it back home. That worked for a bit, but you sort of still don't have any control over it. Like you just need to not have it around you, and sort of gets to the next, next stage, which is all the times I tried to quit, and it wasn't just weed, over my life, I've had a few different girlfriends and different, like I was married, and that was like the longest relationship, and the different things that you take, and get into. If I just look, over that relationship, smoked a lot of weed, did a lot of acid, a lot of MDMA, a lot of ketamine, got into nangs, bit of nicotine over that period, fair bit of smoking and stuff when I was playing a lot of music. And then, you know, we did trips to America, and we did more like acid and stuff, and a lot of weed, and then, you know, over my other relationships, like I dated this other girl, and we got into nangs again, and a little bit of coke, you know, and a bit of a lot of cigarettes. She smoked cigarettes as well. These like popper, like flavored berry cigarettes, you know. She was like Malaysian. She was Malay. Which is like Muslim. And so, you know, we smoked a lot of cigarettes with her and her friends, and she still partied. You know, she still sort of had wildness. You know, and I was, you know, I was known for that as well. Like, just could party. You know, and just and then the next, you know, the next relationship I had, you know, that one with my son's mum, you know, we took a lot of cocaine. We got into cocaine a fair bit in that one, and acid and weed and drinks, so much drinks as well, and you know, taking pretty much everything besides like heroin, you know, and it's just like 16, 17 years of, you know, substances, you know, and by that point, you sort of, to go off it, you know, to go off anything, like you always needed something, and it's just hard. You do it for bits, you know, all the times tried to sort of get off things, and you can't do it, or you do it for a bit, or you go through these like roller coaster bits where you just like message all my friends like, I'm not drinking anymore, you know, and I'm not smoking. I've got like, you know, I'm addicted, you know, and it's embarrassing, as well as it was just messy, and you know, and then within like a month or two, you know, I'd be just like, I'd just start out slowly again, you know, smoke a little bit of weed, and I was never really a bong smoker. I just smoke joints, you know, and it just chill me out, chill my mood out, and drinks, and just go to parties and have a little coke or something like that, or with friends, or we just have sometimes. We always had something in the house, you know, and it really does, you know, you sort of get used to it, you condition yourself to it, and just trying to get off it, you even stop trying, you know, and it's not like you're doing it all the time, crazy, you know, and but it's just always there, you know. And then I got into vapes, and you know, and that's just another thing that is just a thing that you always have, you know. You go to sleep with my vape underneath my pillow, you know, and in relationships as well, you know, you sort of, whatever you're doing, you both do, you know, and so in the like first one, we smoked a lot of weed together, you know, and I sort of like, she didn't even smoke that much weed, you know, before she met me, and it's sort of, you know, she became a bigger weed smoker with me, you know, and same as my friend, you know, growing up, he didn't really smoke weed before like me, and we got into it, and he became a big weed smoker, and the Malay girlfriend that I had, you know, we smoked a lot of cigarettes together, and you sort of just would take on addictions, you take on things, and nangs and stuff, and coke, and then you know, the one with my son's mum, like a lot of alcohol, you know. We'd always have alcohol in the house, and always drink after work, and stuff, and a lot of vodka, a lot of beers, always have just like, it's just a normal thing to smoke a bit of weed, and we vape together as well, and so it's just like toxic substances in you, around you, always, you know. And the vape, like it's like a little thing that you just keep in your hand that would just ground you, you know, and just always have it, and just unconsciously always vaping, you know, and like within every, like, I became more of everything with whatever I did, you know, like, so it was just, you know, you smoke weed, I'd be smoking weed. Weed got to a thing where you'd smoke in the morning before work, on the way to work, you know, during work. The vape was always there as well, you know, and and then, you know, when I was going down the ADHD road, you know, and figuring out that, and got into, you know, okay, like taking some Ritalin, you know, so I started taking Ritalin, and then upping that and taking, you know, changing the different like drugs to, you know, figure out Ritalin had some side effects, you know, a bit edgy after it, and so then found out about like Vyvanse, you know, and then Vyvanse, well, you didn't feel that edginess after it, you know, and it felt stronger, and so you just take that, and but you just abuse it, you know, and just like, and just tried to get off things, and I would do it for a couple of months, and I would just fall back into it. I don't know if it was, you know, it was me, you know, I take responsibility for it, but also just the people that you're like have around, like you're not going to get off it, you know, if you've got friends that do all that stuff as well, and but it was me. You got to take responsibility for it, you know, and I just remember going back to like, you know, when we first had our daughter, and I just remember these feelings when, you know, when we were at the hospital, you know, when she was born and stuff, those first couple of weeks, and it's like I just really want to get off weed, you know, like I want to be different from my kid, you know, and for a few weeks I didn't smoke weed, you know, and then I just went back to weed, you know, and so like the whole time, you know, I'd get home from work, and I would, you know, I'd give my ex-wife like a break, you know, she'd been with her with the baby all day, and I'd just be walking, you know, my daughter in the pram and stuff, and I'd be smoking joints, you know, and just always something around, you know, and not like I was blowing in her face, it would be away from her, but it's still just like always having something, and all the moments, you know, all the moments that like, you know, I built all this, you know, at a rental that we sort of Airbnb at the back, you know, and we always had like sort of different people coming and staying there, and that was fun and cool, and smoke weed, but it was sort of like, you know, we had to build all this big veggie garden, and you know, front area for us, and we just always had joints and stuff still, you know, and my daughter, you know, it wasn't like in her face or anything, but it was just like I was stoned, you know, like, and some people are okay with that and everything, but like I always had this sort of thing inside that like I'm not proud of that, you know, like I don't want to be like that. I don't want to have to, you know, I don't want to need anything, you know, I want to be in the moment, you know, and so many times that it took me away from the moment that was right in front of me, you know, and I still have the memories of all those, you know, times with my daughter and picking veggies out of the veggie garden and stuff, but just always had a joint in my hand, always had, you know, always had something like that, and you know, I was a good dad. I would still like, you know, spend like my whole afternoon. I love my kids so much, and you know, bathing her and playing and reading and drawing with her, and you know, putting her to bed and reading books, and there were beautiful moments, you know, and but like most of them probably stoned, you know, and most of them like wasn't baked out of my head, but it still just was like I was baked, you know, and um, and then she'd go to bed, and me and her mum would smoke weed and watch stuff and hang out, and yeah, and then we'd just have these moments where I'd just be like, you know, she struggled with depression as well, you know, and so it was just like I want something better for her, you know, I want something better for my kid's life and her life, and you know, and I went back to the Jehovah's Witness thing for a while, and that freaked her out. She grew up a Jehovah's Witness as well, and she sort of, you know, she left that as well, and I just wanted something better, you know, I just wanted something better for my family, you know, and I knew drugs wasn't the answer, you know, and on this search, you know, and just like drugs were just taking me away from the moment, you know, and you sort of get this pleasure feeling in the moment with the weed, but then after it, you know, I had this guilt that I'd wake up for years, you know, with smoke weed that night in the morning, I just wake up with this guilt, you know, and I went to therapy for it for years, and it's pretty much just like condition myself to get like let go of it, you know, and I think that's, you know, I think that like I look back and that was like your conscience, you know, and like telling you like you're not okay with this, you know, there's this conflict within yourself, you know, and that is like trying to tell you that, and got to a point where I just sort of like phased it out of my mind and my soul, and so then I just didn't feel guilty anymore, you know, like waking up, and I still woke up with this like, you know, this dark cloud over my head, but you would just sort of phase it out with coffees and keep moving and get to work, and within an hour or two you feel okay, and it's just this depression, you know, and this like generational trauma and stuff, and all this stuff that you'd sort of shove down, you know, and you tell yourself that you're fine, you know, and tell yourself it's just like you're in denial though, you know, and all these moments, you know, and then it just reminds me of all these like, you know, we used to go hiking and snowboarding and stuff, and a lot, you know, and hiking with mates, and we'd go camp, and you know, in like the mountains of Kosciuszko and stuff, and but I just would be like, you know, I'd always have weed and stuff, and always be like, we'd be hiking up a beautiful mountain, and I'd be like, okay, I'm just gonna go, like, does anyone want weed? I'd always just like, you know, and be like smoking a joint behind a rock out of the wind. Everyone's hiking, and like I get back on the track, and just like always baked, always had something, you know, like, and just like taken away from the moment, you know, like didn't need that stuff, you know, like why was I doing that, you know, like, and it just makes me think about, yeah, all the people I affected as well, you know, like with, part of it could be like my Maltese, you know, like European side of like share, you know, I'd always cook for, I have heaps of people over and cook for them, and always be like, hey, have some of this, and like drinks and weed and just sharing and everything, but you gotta be real careful with that stuff, you know, like I remember sharing alcohol with my mate's girlfriend, and you know, she didn't drink that much, you know, and she just kept giving her wine and stuff, and she just ended up being thrown up, you know, and it's like, that's my fault, you know, like I kept giving her too much, you know, and did that with weed with people as well, and you know, and deep down, I knew like it's not who I am, you know, it's not who I want to be, and I want to be different, you know, and you know, giving people my brother and weed, and like they you know, they had their own experiences with that sort of stuff, and it wasn't good, you know, and I was sort of giving it to them again, you know, and friends, and so it's sort of not only, you know, your own thing, you know, drugs, but like the people you affect as well. It's like a circle around you, you know, and then, you know, all the things that I did on drugs that I'm not proud of as well, you know, and like things I've said, you know, and to people, is I sort of, I was harshest in, you know, in my relationships as well, you know, you like that you're real with them and care about them so much, but you also, you know, if you're just not grounded all the time, if you got drugs in you, you know, and so, you know, said stupid things, you know, did stupid things, embarrassing things, and hurt people, you know, and it doesn't feel good to do that sort of stuff, and you know, it's just, you know, having drugs in your system, having drugs around, it's not helping that, you know, if you're trying to, if you don't want to be like that, you know, even if it wasn't all the time, just like okay, how can you be a better person? You know, how can you not, how can you send love out and goodness instead of, you know, exposing people to drugs and exposing people to, you know, altered state of mind that is not in reality, you know, and it's going to be good in the moment, and then they're all going to go home and they're going to have, you know, their struggles, you know, when you're not around, you know, and and they might not be good for a couple of days, you know, and if it's weed, I remember I've done that with mates who bring mushrooms, you know, I'd bring mushrooms and then they showed me a video later, his girlfriend showed me a video of him like that night or the next morning, and he was just zonked out, and it's like, I did that, you know, like, and he'd had his own battles with that sort of stuff, you know, and I still came to those, you know, to those areas and just exposed them to that again, you know, and they trusted me and I was their good friends, and you know, and I feel bad about that, you know, and that's what drugs do, you know, and so all the people I affected, you know, with my drug addiction and all the things that I did, you know, on drugs, and you know, I just, you know, and how I treated my girlfriends at times, you know, and how I was just too obsessed with sex and stuff, and you know, probably made them feel not, you know, not good, objectified, you know, in a way, and you know, things I'm not proud of, and that it doesn't help, you know, like, and I look back and it can be, you know, it can be, you can change, you know, you can change, and you can, you know, you can look back and that can be, you know, God uses that as your testimony, is like, this is what I was, you know, and this is who I am now, you know, and Jesus, he frees you from those chains of addiction, you know, and so many times I tried to quit, you know, and never could sustain it past a couple of months, you know, and you know, when things weren't good, you go to weed, you go to drugs, you go to anything, you know, and now I go to Jesus, you know, and like a year and 3 months, like being, you know, even though I've had my trips and my falls still over that time for a couple of months at a time, maybe 2 or 3 times, you know, and still get back, like it's still been the longest time I've been sober, you know, in my whole life, you know, since I was, you know, well, since I was probably like, you know, 13, 14, you know, like since then, you know, like, so it's wild, you know, 16, 17 years, more longer, 18 years, you know, of all of those substances and vices and stuff, and you know, I couldn't do it, you know, I couldn't do it on my own, I couldn't get off those things, you know, and you give up in a way of trying, you stop trying, you know, and your self-esteem goes out the window then as well, you know, if you can't do what you say and what you want to do, you know, it's just, it sucks, you know, and it's like you're not in line with who you want to be, you know, you're not aligned with who you could be, you know, and Jesus frees you from that, you know, and like he cares about you, and he gets you off that stuff, and he gives you grounding and hope and love, and you know, turns it into a good thing, you know, turns all that pain and addiction and turns it into, you know, your testimony, and you can help other people experiencing that, you know, and help them to, like, you know, get on the path of, you know, freedom, you know, and and helping others, you know, and serving others, and you know, in my life now, you know, like the Holy Ghost, you know, like it feels like a drug, you know, like it's like just pure like peace, you know, and love, and you know, I get tingles, you know, and goosebumps, you know, and when I'm doing the right thing, you know, and like I just want that for everybody as well, you know, like just to see that it's not the answer. Drugs, you know, drugs aren't the answer. Have a long history with it, you know, and Jesus is the answer, you know, and he helps you through your pain, you know. You just give him a chance. And the Holy Ghost is real, you know. The Holy Ghost is there, and Holy Spirit, man, like it's something else, you know. And I just think give your addictions to Jesus, you know. Give them to Jesus, and he'll take them from you and give you love back, you know, and give you peace back, and give you meaning and purpose back. And there's nothing else like it, you know, and gives you hope again, gives you something to like work towards in your life, you know, and just flips your world around, you know. And all those times, you know, with the weed and the drugs and the, you know, and everything, you know, and it's just, I was a lower type of person, you know, and I feel different now, you know. I feel like something's changed in me, you know, and I know that I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna go that way anymore, you know, and I haven't, and you know, we might slip from time to time, you know, we just get back on that road, you know, to freedom, you know, and I don't have that urge anymore, you know. I'm not curious about that, you know, and it's not the answer. It's not the answer. And the answer is Jesus. The answer is, you know, is sending love out and giving that love back, you know, and yeah. So I think give your drug addiction to Jesus, you know, and it's helped me, got me off all that stuff, got me clean, got me on the right path, you know, and I'm so much happier right now, so much healthier, you know, and I feel better, I feel cleaner, I feel healthier, I feel more aligned, you know. I feel more aligned with who I've always wanted to be, you know, and I'm not perfect, I'm gonna slip up again, you know, but I'm prouder of myself now, you know, than all those broken times, you know, and all those moments where I just couldn't do what I wanted to do, you know. And Jesus gets you there, you know. Jesus really does. And anyway, I think that's pretty much it for this episode, and I hope it helps somebody, and I hope, you know, hope it can do something for you. And come to Jesus. Tune in to the next episode, and if you like this video, give it a like. Thank you. Bye bye.